Joining us now, Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. The senator serves on the Senate Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee, as well as the Appropriations, Foreign Relations, and Judiciary Committees. He's a busy man. Senator, thanks for joining us this morning. A lot of ground to cover with you, but let's start with this news here. The trade deal with the UK expected to be announced in about an hour's time. Your reaction to that, but also in terms of where it fits in President Trump's larger approach on trade. You just heard him there in that sound talk about, just even acknowledging that there's a lot of inconsistency and uncertainty stemming from his policies.
Well, President Trump promised that he would lower prices on American families on day one. And here we are well past day 100. And I believe Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve, that Trump's chaotic tariff rollout has, in fact, increased prices and reduced growth in the American economy. We'll see what he actually announces later today with the UK. But the EU, a much larger economic bloc than the single country of the UK, is readying 100 billion euros of tariffs on American products. So if he doesn't get moving fast and deliver more, we're going to see really big impacts on the household budgets of hundreds of millions of Americans.
And that's coming down the pike fast. Vice President J.D. Vance offered a candid assessment of where negotiations stand between Russia and Ukraine yesterday. Speaking at a Munich leaders meeting on international security policy in Washington, Vance said the United States believes Russia is asking for too much at the bargaining table.
I wouldn't say that the Russians are uninterested in bringing this thing to a resolution. What I would say is right now, the Russians are asking for a certain set of requirements, a certain set of concessions in order to end the conflict. We think they're asking for too much. There's a big gulf, predictably, between where the Russians and the Ukrainians are, and we think the next step in the negotiation is to try to close that gulf. We think it's probably impossible for us to mediate this entirely without at least some direct negotiation between the two, and so that's what we focus on.
Hours later, President Trump was asked about Vance's comments.
Vice President Vance said Russia was asking for too much to end the war. Given that, do you still have confidence that...
When did he say that?
Earlier this morning.
Well, it's possible that he's right. He may know some things that, because I've been dealing with this and some other things, but we are getting to a point where some decisions are going to have to be made. I'm not happy about it. I'm not happy about it.
All right, Senator. I don't even know what to make of that answer, actually. So I am so worried the U.S. is turning its back on Ukraine.
Well, Mika, if Vice President Vance is waking up to the idea that Russia under Putin is an aggressor, that's a good thing. But it is it makes me heartsick on the 80th anniversary of our victory in Europe over aggression and fascism that it's so hard for President Trump and Vice President Vance to see clearly that Putin has been playing them for months, that he has no intention of coming to the table in good faith and negotiating a peace agreement. And only by standing up to Putin, only by doubling down on our support for Ukraine, is there any hope of a just peace in the ongoing war of aggression in eastern Ukraine. President Trump famously said to President Zelensky, "You have no cards," in their appalling meeting in the Oval Office. That's because President Trump started these negotiations by handing his cards away, by saying he would not support NATO membership, by saying he would recognize Crimea and would not push back on Russian occupation of the Ukrainian lands they've taken by force. In a nation where our modern history was built on the sacrifice and bravery of millions of American troops who fought in Europe in World War II, this has rolled back our place in the world. There is still time for Trump and Vance to see this clearly, and Senator Graham is moving a sanctions bill here in the Senate that now has, I believe, more than 70 co-sponsors that would impose really brutal sanctions, secondary sanctions on Russia if they begin again their aggression after a peace deal. But this is going to take presidential leadership to resolve and to get a just peace. And so far, it doesn't seem to me that our president has woken up to the fact that Putin's been playing him all along.
And we should note that Vladimir Putin today in Moscow is standing with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Senator, elsewhere on the globe, we want to talk to you about the Middle East. President Trump will actually be doing his first foreign trip of this term next week, starting in Saudi Arabia, going to a couple other Gulf states while there. Talk to us, please, about what he will face while there. Your concerns in particular about negotiations with Iran, and the attacks in Yemen on the Houthis, and what's happening in Gaza.
Well, first, there was a positive development in that there was the announcement of an agreement between the United States and the Houthis to stop striking each other, the Houthis to stop striking ships in the Red Sea, and the United States to stop bombing them. It was jarring that President Trump recognized the bravery of the Houthis. That would be like him recognizing the bravery of Hamas. There is an unfolding humanitarian disaster in Gaza because of a full stop of any humanitarian aid getting in. When President Trump came into office, there was real positive movement in Gaza. There was a ceasefire in place. There were dozens of hostages released, and there was robust humanitarian aid getting in to address the suffering of 2 million Gazans. That's changed. In the last few months, the war has restarted. Israel has blockaded Gaza from humanitarian aid, and the Saudis have made it perfectly clear they will not move forward with recognizing Israel with normalization without progress on the Palestinians, without a path towards self-governance, without reopening humanitarian relief. Trump has an enormous opening here, an opportunity to show real leadership on the world stage by pressing Netanyahu to abandon the idea of occupying Gaza fully, to abandon the idea of displacing Palestinians, and to restart vetted humanitarian aid into Gaza. So this is a consequential trip. If instead he fully embraces further occupation of Gaza and no humanitarian aid, I think he'll find his meetings in Saudi Arabia difficult.
Yeah, and one note on Gaza, the World Central Kitchen, a not-for-profit food relief charity, which had been providing meals in the enclave since the war broke out, announced yesterday that it is shutting down meal-making operations in that territory due to a lack of supplies. Israel's blockade of aid entering into Gaza has been in effect since early March. The World Central Kitchen says it will continue to help Palestinian families in Gaza by aiding in water distribution, but it won't be able to help with food going forward until Israel allows aid to enter in the territory. And lastly, Senator, one of your committees, the Appropriations Committee, just moments from now, FBI Director Kash Patel will testify there as the Trump administration seeks to cut over $500 million from the Bureau. Senator Coons, you, of course, will be in that hearing. What do you hope to find out here? What are going to be some of your and your colleagues' questions for the FBI Director?
Well, President Trump and DOJ, while it was being led by Elon Musk, imposed cuts on hundreds of state and local law enforcement agencies around our country, canceled, I think, 350 grants that were going to victims assistance, to support for anti-violence initiatives, support for police officers. And now, in his budget proposal, President Trump is calling for a $500 million cut to the FBI. I will be pressing FBI Director Kash Patel on how he will implement these cuts, how this is anything other than directly defunding the police, and how this will help in the fight against violent crime, against counterterrorism, and the important work that the FBI does across our country. There's also been some disturbing movement in the direction of firing those who had a hand in the January 6th investigations. I'll remind you, one of the most disturbing things President Trump's done from a law enforcement perspective was to pardon all of the January 6 rioters, including those who viciously assaulted police officers. Even the FOP denounced that move by President Trump. They had endorsed him, but this has drawn the ire of lots of supporters of law enforcement. And the threats to fire those FBI agents who investigated the January 6 rioters, simply doing their job as they were assigned, is something I'll also be pressing Kash Patel on today.
All right. Democratic member of the Senate Foreign Relations and Judiciary Committee, Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, we appreciate you. Thank you very much for being on this morning.